Hi, I'm David Bell, and I've got a very short period of time. I'm tremendously glad to be here because it means I'm not being interviewed about the referendum. My only other appointment today is to be interviewed in front of the US consulate by Russian television about the Scottish referendum, not about the Ukraine. So there we are. So I come at this basically from a reformed neoclassical economist point of view. I've taken a great interest really in behavioral economics, which I think is one part of the answer in recent times, and we have a very strong department in that at Stirling. I'm also working with my colleague David Blanchflower around the issue of why real wages have been so resistant to increasing after this recession, when in almost all other recessions, maybe this is stage 5 of capitalism, they have managed to come back. Danny and I have also written an article which amazingly has appeared in is appearing this month actually in the Journal of Money, Credit and Banking on the trade-off between inflation and unemployment. So it has been an accepted standard for many years that what central banks should do is to target inflation, and effectively unemployment would look after itself. But if you look at from a well-being perspective, individuals, as common sense might tell you, are much more concerned about unemployment than they are about inflation, and our article makes that point fairly clearly. And indeed, we've been a little bit successful in getting the Bank of England to start to take on board the notion that unemployment matters as well. We've had the somewhat strange experience of what's being called forward guidance, where the bank would only begin to think about increasing interest rates once the unemployment dropped to a certain level. That seems to have fallen by the wayside. Danny and I are trying to convince, or have been trying to convince the authorities that the unemployment rate doesn't really fully measure the slack in the labour market now, but instead you've got to take into account underemployment. So lots of people are in jobs where they would like to work more hours, but they can't, and in a sense that's a form of rationing of labour. However, I just want to talk a little bit, not quite so much on what you've already heard, but the context in which a new economy needs to be invented, and that's, I guess, a bit of a background of all of the massive changes that have happened in the world economy and indeed the world population over the last 50 years or so. Some of the things that have happened have not been all bad. So there are trade-offs that have to be made, and some of these are difficult trade-offs. Let me talk, for example, about the growth in population. In 1963, there were 3.1 billion souls on this planet, and now there are 7 billion souls. So we've doubled the population in 50 years. The world's population is living longer. In 1963, life expectancy was around 54, and it's now over 70. There's been huge increases in life expectancy. That has consequences. The population is aging. It's against that sort of background that we've got to think about reinventing the economy. The global share of older people aged 60 and over increased from 9.2% in 1990 to 11.7% in 2013. It's going to reach 21.1% in 2050. So 1 in 5 of all citizens in the world will be aged over 60 by 2050. And it's the oldest old that will grow fastest. By 2050, there will be 392 million people on this planet who are aged 80 or 80 or over. So a very substantial proportion of the population will be of that age, and they will largely be dependent on the working age population. In Europe, Britain is probably one of the best placed countries in terms of aging. So by 2050, Spain, Portugal, Greece, Germany, and I think it's Latvia, will have more than one pensioner for every 2 working age people. So there's a very substantial change ongoing at the moment. In the UK, it's about a quarter, there's 1 person to 4, 1 pensioner to 4 working age people. One consequence that has also happened is that fertility has dropped massively. So in 1963, the average woman across the planet had 5 children. It's now down to just over about 2.3. What that's done is to allow women much more into the labour market than has been the case in the past. So female participation in the labour market has increased quite a lot. And in a way, in a strange way, that's had quite a lot of effect on inequality. Why is that the case? People tend to sort with people of the same level of education. So it's called the sort of mating. People tend to match by educational level. Previously, if one of those was in the labour market, the gaps in income weren't that great. If both of them, highly educated people are in the labour market, you get these couples with stratospheric earnings. So the way that participation for women has increased has also, there's a trade-off, to a certain extent influenced inequality. And it is true that a lot of the changes that have taken place, and in particular what has happened in China, which has hugely negative environmental effects, has reduced world poverty in the sense that the number of people living on less than $1 a day has declined quite substantially. In 1980 it was 1.5 billion, and it's now around 800 million. Largely due to the changes that have taken place in China. The only part of the world where it continues to increase, although at a relatively slow rate, is sub-Saharan Africa, where fertility rates haven't dropped. So, what about the drivers of inequality? We're going to have a discussion about inequality today. What things matter? Well, the way that the changing demand for products matters. I'll come back to that. Technical change matters. The decline of trade unions matter. Changing household composition matters. Trends in participation matter. And also rent seeking. And we have tended to focus on rent seeking, which is basically those at the top making sure that they take an ever larger share of the pie, but there are other things going on, and these are quite important. So for example, if you take, for example, the number of bank clerks in the UK, who are sort of low to middle income people, they've halved since 2002. Between 2002 and 2012, fallen from about 300,000 to 150,000. The number of ATMs has gone up to compensate. So technical change has taken a chunk of people out of the low to middle end of the income distribution, and that, depending on how you measure inequality, matters. Huge changes in occupational demand. If I can talk about Scotland, for example, we were looking at occupational how many people were working as carers? In 1983, we couldn't find any. We looked at the census, or the labour force survey, we couldn't find any. Now there are 70,000. In textiles, we had 50,000 in 1983, and now about 5. So you get these changes, and of course they have corresponding changes on the other side of the world. Well, not so much with carers. Carers is a localized demand, but what's happened in textiles has affected our economy. We also have a huge change in household structure. Far more people living alone, or in two-person house. Single-person households accounted for about 11% of households in 1961, and now about 30%. So how we live together affects the way that the resources are going to be distributed. It affects we've got the wrong kind of housing stock for the population that, or the way we want to sort ourselves in relation to population and so on. So, in terms of inequality, if you're looking at earnings inequality, both in the UK and Scotland, the big change took place in the 1980s. That was when most of the action took place. What has happened since then has been largely about the top 2% of earners. And that's where the action has been very recently. So, for example, in 1997, if you take Scotland, the top 1% took 6.3% of the income. In 2009, they took 9.4% of the income. So the top 1% of earners took 9.4% of the income. Basically the same for the rest of the UK, if you exclude London. If you take London, the top 1% take 14.1% of the total income. So there's an interesting discussion about rent seeking to be had around that. One of my main concerns is about the relationship between income inequality and health inequality, because income inequality and health inequality are quite largely related. Income inequality has been associated with large differences in health, and actually I do have some slides here, but I'll just finish off to say that in Scotland, life expectancy has increased from about 69 to about 79 between 1963 and 2012. But we still have massive differences across Scotland. And it is now the case that life expectancy in the world as a whole is just about to catch up with life expectancy in the poorest decile of Scottish households. So we have a very serious problem, not just of income inequality, but the associated social ills that accompany income inequality. And I'll leave there. Thank you.